Alright, I'm excited. I received my casts today from Lithic Casting Lab. Lithic Casting Lab. Yeah, I ordered several casts of Cody types, Scott's Bluff and Eden points from the Finley's Bison Kill site. Right? So I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Why did I order these? So I can look at the edge sharpening and the general configuration. Alright, so you can go on the site, the Lithic Casting Lab site, and look all these up. Now, I'll be showing these edges up close. Oops. Okay, I'll try to be really careful about how I'm holding these. This first one here is it's discovered sometime in the 30s or 40s. This Scott's Bluff was made from black opaque chert, measures 3 1/16 inches. Yeah, that's the thing I was looking at earlier. These are not very big. Okay, see that? These are plastic. In case you missed it, or you're not familiar with this kind of stuff. This is a plastic duplicate created from a mold where the original was used to make the mold, right? So this is a way that we can all study very rare artifacts. Every piece in here is very rare. The originals are very rare, okay? And the type of Flintknapping that this employs is also rare. It's very difficult to produce this kind of flaking without a lot of practice. Now, if this is the only type of flaking that you do your entire life, it's not bad. If I switch my mindset to doing only this type of flaking, it doesn't take very long for me to switch over. But after about 10 points, it gets kind of boring. Yeah. Now, back in the day, they didn't have the luxury of stopping because they're bored. Alright, so they just kept making them. And they were made for many hundreds of years. Now, this particular site is known for high level of craftsmanship. Alright, so let's see. I don't know what I should do. One at a time or show them all together? I'm going to put them all together. Yeah. Show them all at once. I'm not going to get mixed up as to which ones go with which bag, because it's pretty easy to spot, although the colors are a little bit off from the photos. Everyone wants to know how to make this one. This is the 1% of the 1%, this type of flaking. This is the kind of thing I'm talking about when I say the 1% of the 1%. It's very rare to find this kind of flaking. And people want to know how do you do it? How is it done? Yeah. With lots and lots of practice and doing only one point style your whole life. That's how it's done. Now, how am I going to do it? I'm going to do it the best I can to show you how to run these flakes so that they meet up with a median ridge. Yeah. Now, sometimes the median ridge is not very pronounced, sometimes it is. Like this one here, the median ridge is not really all that pronounced. There is a median ridge. What's a median ridge? It's the high spot down the middle. See this high ridge down the middle where the flakes kind of meet. Now they made mistakes. See the mistake here? Now that's either a mistake or an internal issue. It looks like it's an internal issue or a pre-existing crack in the material. Yeah, I don't think that was a knapping error. It looks like it's a pre-existing crack in the material, which is pretty common with church, especially if you need a long piece like this. You're going to have to start with a big old chunk. And big old chunks a lot of times have defects that you don't see until the last minute. And some of these are pretty small. Now, are these resharpened? I think so. In some cases, if they break the tip off, they'll make it shorter. But I don't think they're all resharpened. I think this may have been made in this size to begin with. Now, it's pretty easy to see the flake pattern, and you can develop techniques, plural, to make these flake patterns. It's not just one technique with one type of tool that produces these flake patterns. There's not only one technique or only one type of tool that can make these flake patterns. There's different ways to do this. I'm going to show you one or two ways, the ways that I use. And if you notice, these are from the same site, but these are two different styles. The same point, but the flake scarring is a different style. These over here, these three, well no, this one has this style over here. These two on this side have a more persnickety style than the ones on this side. These have a lot of flakering going on. These have minimal flakerings. Okay? In my opinion, it's easier to do these than to do these. These require a setup beforehand so that you can run these flakes just right on the finishing stage. These here on the right, let's separate these again, or separate them so they can look separated. These here on the right require, in my opinion, a very well constructed preform, much like this, before it becomes this. Okay? You have to construct something that looks like this before it becomes this. Because to achieve these regular flakes on a bumpy surface or a wonky surface is almost impossible. Because you have to judge every individual flake on its own merits, and it could take you a week to do this if you don't have a regular preform that looks similar to this. Now, is this a resharpened version of this? No, I don't think so. I just think there's two different styles. All right, I'll show you how to do each one the way I do it, okay? When I do these, they end up looking more like this. All right, I don't like doing these, but everyone wants to see these. These require a lot of practice to get the consistency, and it requires very good material. These, on the other hand, can be made with various materials, and all you need to do is spend a lot of time shooting these little flakes to create the contours that you need. And yeah, it does have a median ridge, kind of, sort of, but it's not as pronounced as this. This style takes advantage of bulbs of pressure, and you'll see in a minute. Okay, this one doesn't take advantage of the bulbs of pressure. These surfaces are not scooped out; they're convex. It's picked quite a bit. It's a very consistent, very straight edge. Is it sharp? No. Ironically, with all that work, they still did not produce a sharp edge. Although it can work, but it feels like a saw blade, and it feels like they picked it too much. Okay, and in plastic you can't really capture the feel of stone, but you can get an idea. It looks dull, and it is dull. It's just picked very consistently to get that outline. And in my opinion, that outline is generated for strength, to make the point less breakable. See that? It's very consistent. That means it has no weak spot, basically, along the length of it where it can snap. So that tells me these are used in a very rugged way where it's subjected to lots of stress, and they want it to stay intact and not break. Now, what kind of shaft is it mounted to? I'm glad you asked, because I have a stash of shafts. I think they're mounted to 4 shafts, just like this. Okay, how do I know it's going to fit in something like that, or how do I make these so that everything fits? After a while, you get used to the averages. All right, these are mounted to 4 shafts, and I believe these are projectile points. It's not really useful as a knife, in my view. I could butcher a lot better if I use something like this rather than something like this. But if shooting this on a projectile is all wonky, I would want to use this to shoot, to mount on something like this, or even a bigger one. It's all wonky. It can be done, but it's curved and the edges are not conducive to penetration. It gets hung up on some of these. But to butcher with this is great. Opposite with this punctures and penetrates well, and I don't think it will encounter rib cages very often because it's so narrow. If it does encounter a bone, it's going to do a direct hit on a bone. If not, it'll hit the side of the bone or go in between on a rib cage. If it hits the side of the bone, it still will penetrate because it's got such a narrow body on it that it'll easily divert a little bit and then penetrate. Okay, even that little bit of diversion there doesn't hurt it much on the penetration. All right, even if it breaks the hafting glue, even if it snaps it like this a little bit, it'll still penetrate. If it hits the rib off center slightly and it breaks the glue joint there, it'll still penetrate. Yeah, it won't penetrate if it hits directly. It may slice the bone instead of doing that, but in most cases, hitting bone is a bad thing. Okay, so it can be mounted like this, where the stem is completely hidden and it's wrapped like this, or you can mount it where the stem is exposed on the sides a little bit. This seems to be stronger, in my view, to mount it like this, where the stem disappears within the haft, and you just wrap around here, and it's very smooth transition between the blade and the stem, because the sinew that goes around here gets built up in this area. You don't have to wrap it up on the blade unless you want to. But the stem, that's where the stem is here. That's why the stem is here. And then you'll build up the wrapping and it'll make a smooth transition here. It'll look nice and neat. Okay, so it would make sense that they'd be hafted like this, but you never know. They could have been hafted like this as well. In the Southwest, similar stems are hafted like this on actual artifacts, where you can see some of the stem and they're just wrapped around without worrying too much about the transition area here on the side. Like basket maker points, sometimes they have this kind of stem. They're just attached to a narrow diameter foreshaft, and they don't care too much about how the wrapping looks. In this case, I can see that this would be a very strong haft for a larger animal. It all depends, I guess, what you're shooting. Anyway, they put these stems on for a reason. You don't need a stem like this. But they thought, and they planned on stems like this for a reason. It's probably to match the width of the foreshaft. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. What can I say about these? Yeah, just persnickety flaking. It's kind of random. I've made them like this. And you just got to be careful not to produce any step fractures. The stems themselves, it's not really anything super symmetrical. It does have symmetry, but as you can see, there's areas that could have been picked off to make it more symmetrical and straighter. Same with the edges. See, there's some imperfections, little step fractures, and this edge is clearly picked, like I just showed in my most recent video before this. I show you how to pick the edge, and that's what this is. It's just picked, and it's not really all that sharp. Okay, so this just takes a long time to get it down to that cross section. Nice and symmetrical and very smooth. Yeah, but they're not that big. A lot of us have, well, I had the misconception that these were large, but they're not. The Scots Bluffs are much larger, 2 3/4. This one is 3 1/8. You can probably see the scars better on this one. And again, this is not sharp. This is just picked, but not very sharp. And they don't take advantage of the scoop outs on these bulbs of pressure. They just pressure flake it to death. Yeah. And it's not all that sharp, and I suppose it doesn't need to be if it's mainly for penetration and not for slicing. Okay, they're trying to penetrate deeply into the hides and skin and internal organs, or maybe even a pass through on the animal. That's what that looks like to me. And again, the base, this could be hafting damage, after being shot at something. This haft will hit the bottom, this stem, will hit the bottom of the hafting area, and it'll cause chipping when you break the glue joint. A lot of old glues do not flex, so it snaps the glue joint in there when it makes impact, or makes contact on impact. It'll snap the glue joint, especially with resin in wintertime, or asphaltum in wintertime. It'll snap this. And you'll get crushing and chipping from the bottom of the notch. Okay, that might be what that is. Okay, that's what that does look like to me, just hafting damage. And that looks like some impact damage on the tip. Anyway, easily repairable. This one doesn't even need to be repaired, but this is easily repairable on the tip. But as you can see, their main concern was just the shape and not sharpening the edge. Their main concern was not to sharpen the edge. It was to obtain this diamond cross section and symmetry, and then put a stem on it. Okay, that's one style. The other style takes it one step further, in my opinion, and makes the flaking very regular. So I think they started out with a preform that looks a lot like this, and then did the final pass to generate these flakes that take advantage of the scoop outs. And this is a serpentine edge. It's very wavy. One edge is straight, one edge is wavy. They're classified as the same type, but different styles of flaking. If you look in between the flakes. You see these high spots? Okay, I'll show you. See these high spots in between? These are like dull spots. You can look down the blade, and that looks like the previous surface. These are part of the previous surface. These high spots in between the flakes. So it looks like a very regular original surface. And they just, let's see if I can tell which direction they started from. Sometimes you can tell if they start from the tip and work down, or they start from down here and work up. This one looks like this overlaps that one, so it might be going down, but it also could be random. It takes a while to study. I would do it, tip down, because your flaker gets dull as you're using it. Come on, where is it? Focus. The flaker gets dull as you're using it, so start it at the tip. That way when it gets dull, you'll be able to still flake on these bigger areas. The flakes, this width on the flakes gets larger and larger as it goes down, but it's very subtle. See how wide that is there compared to this over here? There's a very subtle increase in width, whereas on the other ones, the other style, pretty consistent width on the flakes. It's just picked to death. Alright. This one is a more stylized way of doing it. But as you can see, there's a lot of flakery going on in the middle. So it looks to me like it started out as something like this, but they decided to clean it up with regular flaking. Okay? And the stems are more symmetrical on this type as well, with more attention to symmetry on the stem. These are very, very difficult to do. In my opinion, this type of flaking, to do it consistently and over and get good at, it takes more practice than a fulsome. Fulsome, as long as you can get it flat, which of course takes years to develop the skill to make it flat. Once you get a fulsome flat and thin, it's just a matter of shaping it around the edges. This requires that you start with a lot of flaking, very consistent material, and then pressure flake it to death. And to such an extent, with such skill that you don't shoot past the ridge. Now, is there a way to hold these things in some kind of a pad or whatever to stop the flakes from going across? I don't think so. Although there have been experiments of flint knappers using wooden pads, solid wood pads, to prevent flakes from traveling. But in my experience, when you prevent flakes from traveling, you get step fractures. Little minute step fractures. Here I don't see any minute step fractures. Anything that would indicate that the flake has been stopped. It looks like it's just a free flakes. Okay, with no stoppage or no obstacle. The napper just understood how to very gradually increase pressure to get this type of flaking without shooting across the ridge. And it is possible to overshoot the ridge. Oh yeah. So you can see some of these flakes are not fully, they don't go up fully to the ridge. The ridge was already there beforehand. A lot of these flakes are going up to the ridge, but some of them do not. I think this one terminated before the ridge here. Like, as an example, this one stopped right there, it looks like. So there was a nice ridge before that. Yeah, like I said, this looks like a defect in the stone and not a knapping mistake. And they still used it, apparently, because this looks like damage from shooting it at something. Even with that defect. Can you imagine being this persnickety with the flaking and then leaving a defect like that in there and say, I don't care? Yeah. Alright, so what about the edge sharpness on these? The edges are not sharp on these. In fact, this is duller than the other one. Yeah. Just running my finger across, this one down here with the fancy flaking is duller than this one up here. And yeah, if I were to make this one, the edges, I'm not sharpening the edges with this type of flaking. All I'm doing is thinning the edge and making it pretty to look at. It has the potential to be sharp, but they didn't sharpen it. No, they just left it serpentine or wavy. They could have come back and picked all that to be more consistent and much more sharp, but they didn't. I need to get something to guarantee the focus. Okay. I just activated that yellow square, so maybe, yeah. You can see that I'm still not going to be focused. The yellow square is useless. Alright, so you can see the sharpest areas are going to be in between here. Right there on these upper portions. And this is going to be more dull there. Now, how do you create an edge that's relatively sharp and then pressure flake off of it? Well, you do it with a soft pressure flaker like Antler. Yeah. Using copper on a sharpened edge, if they started with an edge like this one, using copper to go from this to that is going to cause a lot of crushing. If you use a softer pressure flaker, you can do it. You don't have to grind this down like I do with the file and then knap these little flakes. If you have an Antler pressure flaker, you can pick it so it's not all that delicate and reinforce the edge and then push off these flakes with a soft pressure flaker like an Antler pressure flaker. Yeah. You can do it with copper, but the only way I can get it done with copper is to create a very rounded copper tip and wide copper tip pressure flaker so it doesn't crush a small area on the edge. It captures more of the area and therefore I can push off a flake easier, but I would have to use a very thick so-called tip on my pressure flaker. And it makes it very, very difficult to generate enough energy. But apparently that's what they did. It requires a lot of energy to scoop it out that much. Yeah. On Scottsbluff, I do this type of stuff with indirect percussion. I don't do these kinds of Edens because it requires a lot of force with a pressure flaker. A lot of force to generate only small flakes. Short flakes. It's a paradox. Why would you use so much force to create such short flakes? The only reason would be to create something that looks like this. There's no advantage to the function of the point to have it look like this. In fact, it's worse because this edge is duller than the other style. I think these were done for looks, in my opinion, and may have been only for special people to use. Yeah, these are the same. Everything I discussed on this one pertains to this one and the other one. Okay, but I'll be getting into the knapping. What's going on with the lighting? I'll be getting into the knapping on these, and I'll get the lighting figured out. Okay, so this gives you a chance to look at how dull these edges are, which is going to surprise a lot of people, but that's the way it is. You can see the dull spots. And on this other one, you can at least tell that it's kind of jaggedy, but those jagged edges are sharper than these. There's no jagged edges on this, which means it's not as sharp, except where I told you where it was sharp, just on these. I don't know what you call these, but right where the bulb of pressure is on the opposite side, that's where it's sharp. It's sharp intermittently along the edge. And there's some crushing. I'm wondering if it's two flakes overlapping on top of each other. Like they might have taken one flake, a long flake to the middle, and then a short flake into the interior. This might be a two flake process on each one. Well, maybe not on each one, but on some of them. It might be a two flake process. Shoot one flake to the middle and then another shorter flake. I don't know. And they did the persnickety thing on the stem on this one. Let's see on this. Yeah. It's very flakery. And I think this thinning flake here is just incidental. It's not a typical thing on these. That looks like a typical stem. Yeah, this is not a typical flake on one of these stems. I think they did that just for symmetry, just so they can reduce the height of the ridge. Yeah. Okay. Hopefully that was clear. I will be using these casts in upcoming videos very soon and try to duplicate these the way that I do it. Okay. Not the way it was done in the past. It's going to be done the way I do it. All right. There you go.